Welcome to The Buzz. We're going to have some fun, hear things you'll never hear anywhere else, and learn how to take 1 hour off your marathon PR. That may be an exaggeration, but I am Buzz Burrell, and we're going to have real conversations with the people who help define this amazing sport of running, which often feels like more than just a sport. So send me your questions and comments to buzz@ultrasignup.com so we can do this together. This is a production of Ultra Sign Up. Thank you for joining me. This episode is brought to you by Wahoo Kicker Run. Their sponsorship made this episode possible. Wahoo Kicker Run is a very high-end treadmill, a game changer for indoor training. It has run-free mode, so the belt automatically adjusts to your pace based on your position with no buttons or fuss. It's the closest thing to running outside without going outside. And you can train for running in the mountains, because the automatic grade control mimics real-world terrain, shifting from a negative 3% decline to a steep 15% incline. In case you're wondering, I am a big proponent of treadmill training. I personally go to the gym once or twice a week in the winter and during inclement weather, and treadmills are great for tempo runs, for uphills, and they help improve your running form. So check out the Wahoo Kicker Run at wahoofitness.com. Well, John, I have to ask, are you going to the tropics?
Not right away, but I will at every opportunity.
Well said. Well, everyone, I have the pleasure of speaking with Tropical John Medinger, the former publisher of Ultrarunning Magazine, the person who administers the Ultrarunning of the Year awards. So welcome, John. It's so good to talk with you.
Good to talk to you too, Buzz. Good amount.
Yeah, and you, of course, have the Tropical John moniker, which you're noted for wearing a Hawaiian shirt. It's good to have your own brand, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, let's set the stage for Ultrarunner of the Year award. This goes back to 1981. That's 40 years ago. The iconic names. Ann Trayson won Ultrarunner of the Year 10 times in a row. More recently, Courtney DeWalter won 5 times in a row. She did it this year, but we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. So let's first, let's just get caught up with you, and then we're going to get to the results.
Okay.
You have major ultra-running credentials, like over 150, 130 ultra races, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, I think about 150, depending on how you count, right? Some of those badass things maybe shouldn't be counted, but that's where we are.
Yeah, so you're one of these classic ultra runners. You've devoted your life to this sport, which is terrific. You are the founder and race director of the Lake Simcoe 50 and the founder and former race director of the Quad Dipsy. You were the publisher of Ultrarunning Magazine, and I think you've twice been president of the Western States Endurance Run. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay. We're just letting everyone know that you know what you're talking about here. And when you purchased Ultrarunning Magazine in 2003, you took over the Ultrarunner of the Year administration. You are still doing that today.
Yes. I was asked to be a voter sometime in the mid-90s by the 3 guys that originated the magazine, and they were being criticized a little bit by being sort of New England-centric, and so they were looking for people in other parts of the country, and I was already involved pretty heavily at Western States, and for a while I was directing Ewok and Quad Dipsy, so I was involved, and they asked me, and that was a fun project to work on, and I've been doing it ever since.
Indeed, and thank you for doing that. So for the listeners here, I'm not quite sure what our demographic is, but if they're as old as you and I, and by the way, you and I are the same age, that means we're really old. This was iconic. Ultrarunner of the Year was a big deal. If you look through the past winners, it's like a virtual Hall of Fame. In 1981, this was a niche sport. And in a way, this award put it on the map. It gave people something to identify with. So I think it's really quite important.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's overplayed, sometimes it's not. Um, People like these sort of things. It's kind of like the college football polls or something. We don't have an actual championship Super Bowl kind of thing, where Olympics, where there's an obvious thing that everybody comes to. There's a few big deal races like Western States in this country and UTMB in Europe that get tremendous fields, and sometimes the world championship events are like that. And but it's pretty rare for a lot of the top names to be competing at the same time. So you're kind of reduced, instead of having like an actual championship. And then of course you'd have to argue what's the distance and what's the terrain, and is it trail or road or track, and then the multi-day people want their recognition and they deserve that. So it's you're really, as I always, when I talk to voters, we always talk about comparing apples and oranges, but we're also comparing bananas and kumquats and kiwis and pineapples. So it's really a lot of subjectivity, and yet we ask the voters to be analytical, and they do a really good job of it. We publish all the results that we can find for the top in top runners in the country. We typically have 60 or 70 men, 60 or 70 women who are on the data base that we send around. And it's maybe overly inclusive, because typically maybe about 30 of them will actually receive a vote from somebody, but we don't want to forget someone, which is easy enough to do. So we try
Right.
to be as inclusive as possible and give the voters all the data, and then ask them to use their knowledge to try to rank the runners.
Right. There's two things that you said are very important there. First is that there is no established championship. There's definitely now the world championships in short trail, long trail, which
Right.
I personally think is long overdue. I'm really happy to see it here, but that definitely is not taking on an Olympics caliber
Not
credibility.
not yet, it hasn't. It seems like it's starting to grow in importance in the elite runners, and so more and more people participate at the top end. But it's also, there's a short trail and a long trail, and then there's world championships for like every other year for 24 hours and for 100K on roads. Those attract good fields.
Right.
So, you're kind of, even with the long trail getting a terrific field this year, you're still leaving some people out. So it's tricky.
Well, and it was like the infamous, if I should use that adjective, college football championships, because there wasn't a college football championships. There was the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl. But then who actually won? Because these are like UTMB, Hard Rock, Western States. And so the number one college football team in the country was voted upon by
That's right.
coaches and sports writers, which is insanely controversial. And this was a multi-billion dollar industry that's kind of doing it in the same way that you are doing ultra.
Yeah, and I suspect in the early days that was kind of what it was patterned after,
Hmm.
was the college football poll, and because that's all we had until recently in college football, was there be a Associated Press champion, and then there was a coaches poll which came up a little later, and sometimes they had the same answer and sometimes they had different answers, and then you had controversy. And
Controversy.
it's kind of the same in this voting, because it's as analytical as we try to make it, it's still a little bit subjective. You're comparing sometimes runners that didn't compete against each other all year.
Right.
And so how do you do that? Well, you got to know what a good performance is at one race versus another, and what the depth of the field is, and do
Right.
your best to compare all of
We're gonna get into a huge argument over this in a few minutes.
well,
But
that's
for
part of the fun to me,
that part
is
of
this
the
is
fun.
like fodder for having a beer with your running buddies and arguing over, wow, can you believe so and so won? I had her third on my list, you know.
Exactly. But first, we want every listener to understand how this works. Basically, the run of the year, in this 44th year, is North American runners. And they
Right.
could be a citizen or they could reside principally in North America. However, races are international. If you're counting UTMB or whatever you
Right.
are, as long as they're from North America, and, pardon me, only ultra runs, which means over a marathon length.
Right.
It can be road, track, trail. It's not confined to trail running. So there you have it.
Yeah, and right now, if you look at the statistics in the world, about 90% of the ultras are run on trails.
That's
And
interesting, isn't it?
yeah, and then there's 6 or 7% that are roads, and the rest are fixed time events, where they run for 24 hours or whatever, and that's kind of its own separate category.
Yeah, wow. It's interesting how trail dominates. At this point in time, let's do our own countdown. Ultrarunning Magazine just finished their online countdown. Each day they do number 10, the next day they do number 9, rate, and so forth. Want to know
Right.
that the full results, definitely go to Ultrarunning Magazine or the print subscribe to Ultrarunning Magazine. But let's do our own countdown, if you don't mind.
Okay.
We're not doing 10. People are not going to be able to beat 10, I don't think. So how about, John, the top 3 female ultrarunners of the year 2025?
So for North America, top 3 females, in third place was Abby Hall from Flagstaff. We know, let me just look her up real quickly here because my memory is not perfect. I don't want to miss something important, but we know she won Western States in a very fast time, 16:37. And that's always something that attracts a lot of attention from the voters. And she also was 5th at Black Canyon and 4th at the Chianti Castles race in Italy, which were both pretty big events. But she had a DNF at UTMB.
Okay.
And so,
And it was number 2.
she's number 3. Number 2 is Ann Flower from Colorado Springs. And she kind of burst onto the scene in the last or so. She won Leadville and set a course record, beating Nan Trayson's record from 1994 by a few minutes. She also won the Leadville Silver Rush, the 50 miler that's prelude to the 100 miler there. But perhaps her most impressive run of the year was setting a world record at 50 miles at the Tunnel Hill race in the Midwest, where she ran 5 hours and 18 minutes, 57 seconds, breaking the old world record by 13 minutes.
So
And
world
that was
records,
last year.
world records count for the voters, as they should. So who, in case our listeners have not already cast this, who is the number 1 female ultrarunner of the year?
Well, we're getting into repetitive territory here, but the number 1 ultrarunner of the year in North America was Katie Schide. Katie's originally from Maine, now lives in France, in the Maritime Alps. And she won fairly comfortably this year, by a pretty big margin over Ann Flower and Abby Hall, in second and third.
Right. Now, let's just pause on this point. I'm one of the voters. For me, Katie was the only choice I could make. I thought it was kind of a clear choice. She didn't do a ton of races, but she won the big races and set records in many of them. And so I noticed that she did get a solid percentage of the number 1 She was kind of the runaway, pardon the pun, winner in the female category.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, she set a course record in hard rock. She won the World Long Trail Championship, which was a pretty big deal. And she also won the Madeira Island Ultra Trail in Portugal, which is also a pretty big race. So she only ran 3 races, but she won all of them, and they were all kind of big deal races. So pretty clean resume, and nobody else in the hunt. Um, quite had the depth of her performances. Obviously, Anne's Flowers races were terrific, but you don't get the same kind of female competition at Leadville as you would say at UTMB or the World Championships.
Right. Indeed. I think the voters made the right choice. I kind of hate to editorialize, but objectively speaking, what your voting instructions ask people to do, what's the head-to-head competition? It's not a popularity contest. It's supposed to be
Right.
who really did the best. And we kind of look at it in context here. So go back a few years and Courtney DeWalter won in 2018, 19, COVID was 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. And then Katie last year, and then this year. So there's been a little changing of the guard, we could say.
I think that's fair to say. Unfortunately, we don't get to see them race against each other very often. Um, they have at Western States a few years ago. They finished 1-2, but yeah, there has been a little bit of a changing of the guard. Courtney um, was, she had a DNF at Cocodona, and then she faded in the last third at UTMB and ended up kind of walking it in. And I give her high marks for gutting it out, but it doesn't do your resume any favors to go from first to 10th in the last 30 miles. So,
Right.
but it happens.
It definitely happens. It's a tough competition. And we should note that Courtney was voted 10th this year. So she's still
Right.
the top. All right. That's very interesting. Shall we switch to the male Ultrarunners of the year?
To do that. So in third place is Ben Demon, and he may not be as familiar to the average listener of this podcast as some of the other names because he lives in France. He's an American citizen, um, but he now lives in the Pyrenees on the French side. But he had a terrific year. He was second at UTMB, which is obviously a huge deal. He also won the Lavaredo Ultra Trail, 125K, I think it is, in Cortina, Italy. Which is a huge deal over there, probably the second most important race in Europe to UTMB. And he won the Grand Raid Vento in France as well, which was a race that was about 85K, I think. And so he got 2 wins and a second at UTMB, all kind of important races, and that got him up into third place. In second was Western States winner Caleb Olson. Also had a terrific year. He had 4 wins during the year. He won Trans Gran Canaria, a pretty important race. He won Western States, of course, in a very fast time, second fastest time ever. And then 2 smaller wins, 50K in Salt Lake City area where he lives, and a 100-miler called Grampians Peak in Australia, which he won by rather a lot, couple hours, I think. And I think he went down there because it's a hard rock qualifier, and he didn't have one. So uh, I think that was his reason for going down there. But he had a DNF at the World Long Trail Championships, and that was the only blemish on his record this year. But it was enough to knock him down into second place.
And
And
first place is a familiar
first place, drum roll, who's won it many times before, from Flagstaff, is Jim Walmsley. Jim had an unblemished year. He ran 4 ultras. He won all 4 of them, starting with a relatively low-key race in Arizona. Um, called Mesquite Canyon, 16 years old, and he broke the course record by 20 minutes. For 50K, that's a pretty big improvement. He also won the Chianti Castles race in Italy ahead of Kilian Jornet. And he won the World Long Trail Championships. That's probably the biggest deal of the year. An awful lot of good runners were there, 300 or so of them, and he won comfortably there. And he had a come from behind win at the OCC race, which starts in Switzerland and finishes in Chamonix, France, as part of the UTMB series, and also very elite field there. So 4 big wins for Jim. And of course, his reputation sort of precedes him with the voters. I was struggling a little bit how to define that, but it was like looking at Courtney Dauwalter's results this year. What if it was Courtney Jones that ran those races? You have to ask yourself that, because you know how great Courtney is and has been, and you don't want to get drawn up in that. You try to be analytical, but just look at the numbers. What did she do this year?
That's good. I like that, John. In that your instructions are very explicit. You want, particularly accentuate head-to-head competition, and you can say it's objective. It's not a popularity contest, but if this takes hours. I mean, I'm a voter. My stomach is getting upset. My armpits are sweating because I'm trying to be a good job. I'm trying to do the best I can, and it gets kind of tricky to do. At least for me, though, number ones were pretty easy, and there was a little bit of coin flipping after that.
Yeah, I think that's not uncommon. Some years, somebody like Katie this year kind of stands out. As good as the other women were, Katie is Katie and sort of untouchable right now. And so you recognize that, and she won relatively comfortably. And we've had a couple of times in the past where there was a unanimous winner. I mean, it was that dramatic, a drop first to second. But we have about 40 voters, and so to get all 40 of them on the same page, not always that easy. But
Well,
I think,
you should say you don't want that. Because as you know, I started fastest known time of the year awards, which is
yes,
usually modeled after what you did. I'm quite clear that I wanted to literally copy it. And it's very interesting because I don't do that, administer that anymore since we sold the business to Outside Inc. But I really noticed that in that voting, never did one person pick the top 5.
yeah.
Isn't that interesting? But when you put them together, your results are good. So a group think, to my opinion, leads to better results than one expert or even 10 experts. 40 people will yield a better result because their differences of opinion will actually be valuable.
I think that's right. And I think that's an important point, because I look at the results at the end of it all. When I add up everybody sends me their votes, and it takes a little while to compile them all and add up the points. And I look at the results from first to 10th and even beyond 10th. And I'm really impressed every year with how good the results are. You question the process. Are we doing this right? Are the right people voting? That sort of thing. But when you look at the results in a very analytical sort of way, it's really impressive. I think they do a great job. The people that vote are all pretty savvy veterans, a lot of race directors and people in the sort of ultra running press, such as it is. Some podcasters. I run far kind of people, and the people that really pay attention to the sport, that follow it closely and carefully. And it gets a little complicated, because if you're one of those people, personally a lot of the runners you're voting on. So, we're all, and we coach everybody. This is not a popularity contest. It's okay if runner number 3 is a jerk, if he runs really fast. And, fortunately, I don't think we have a lot of jerks in our sport, but, some people are inevitably more popular than others, but that's not what we're going for here. We're just trying to look at the results.
You said they could be your friends.
Yes.
But
And they
still,
are in many cases. And you know, and that's great. But, you know, I might have to, you can be a really good friend of mine. I still might vote you seventh. You know? So,
indeed. Here's an interesting perspective. So when you took it over, of course, the original there's three gentlemen, kind of the engineer, mathematician types from New England.
yes.
And then you swung it back out west. So Ultrarunning Magazine has been kind of Northern California centric a little bit, sort of Western States 100 a little bit more. So if someone would just say, this is a little no-cal centric, and if you're from the East Coast, you don't have a chance. The voters really very well balanced. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think there's sometimes a perception of that, but I think the perception more is that it's like Western states centric. That gets too much attention, and that somebody can win Leadville or Vermont or Wasatch or some other, you know, legacy race, and they don't get any care. And while I hear that comment, my response to it generally is, yeah, but look who ran. You have circumstances where runners who finished 8th or 10th at Western States win everything else they run. And because it has that kind of competition, and because the first priority, and this is actually the instructions that I'm using now, have substantially been unchanged since the 80s. We look head to head first, because if you're going to compare runner A and runner B and runner C, and they have a race where they all run against each other, there's your data. And you know, where that happens in this country, I mean, there's some other races that get good fields, Run Rabbit Run and Lake Sonoma and some other places, but Western States is by far the most significant competition depth wise.
Right. Well, you look at the winners, and sometimes the top three are
the top 3 or 4 are kind of in the hunt, right? And so if you look at, you know, but then you have people like Meg Eckert, who set a record for a world record for 6-day run, which became this year's performance of the year for women.
Let's swing into that. Whoa, John, you're perfect for podcasting. Your segue there was it's like good thing we spent a few hours rehearsing this conversation in advance.
Yeah, we spent at least 20 seconds rehearsing this conversation.
Indeed. And so obviously Ultrarunner of the Year, we just went through the female and the male winners, but there's also performance of the year for male and female, and age group performance of the year.
Yes.
We're going to leave that alone, but right now let's just do the number one performances of the year. And you just mentioned Meg Eckert, and she did her 603 miles in France.
In 6 days, that still blows my doors off. I mean, I know what running 100 miles feels like. And the thought of doing it 6 days in a row, nonstop, without sleep, you know, I mean, obviously she slept some, so she had to make up that time. That's just mind boggling. And especially when you compare it to the American men's record, Joe Fages is only a couple of miles more. So it's a outlier performance. She broke the world record by 32 miles or something. And that, you know, like a 5% improvement, which is pretty much unheard of. And
5%.
I want to give a shout out to the women this year, because I was looking at the performance of the year, and the top 7 or 8 performances were so good this year that they would have won outright many other years. I mean, you had Megan Eckert, 603 miles in 6 days, which was the ultimate winner. We talked a little bit earlier about Ann Flowers' 50 mile at Tunnel Hill. 5:18, terrifically fast time. It gets maybe diminished a little bit because 50 miles is only a thing in the U.S. In that sort of 80K elsewhere, and that doesn't round her off quite right. But then you had also Ann Flower at Leadville setting a course record that was 30 years old. And then you had Katie Schide at Hard Rock breaking Courtney's course record. You had Katie Schide winning the World Long Trail Championship. That's a huge deal. You had Tara Dower at Javelina setting a huge course record. You had Courtney Olson setting an American record at 100K at Tunnel Hill. Those are 7 performances that in any other year would have been the easy winner. And so,
and John, let's put even a better point on it. Or you go back 5 years, they would have been the overall winner of the race.
Absolutely. I looked at that, and then we didn't even get to like one of the, I think maybe underappreciated performances of the year, but it's kind of hard to quantify, was Rachel in Trekkin's Cocodona. Just looking at the raw times, I mean, it's hard for people to relate to 250 miles running through the desert. And, for a time I lived really right on that course and in Sedona and worked in the aid station there. And it was like zombie central. We were at like mile 145 or something.
Zombie central.
It was entertaining to work that aid station. The aid station was open for like 2 days because the runners are so spread out.
That's a tough aid station. Anyway,
I digress there. On the men's side,
I just should mention, John, I should mention that I had Rachel on my top 5 list, and she didn't even make the top 5. But like you said, there's 10, 15 people.
I think it was a little underappreciated, and maybe too. Riley Brady's Black Canyon 100K time, kind of just head and shoulders better than you might have expected a woman to run on that day. So really impressive year for the women. On the men's side, Charlie Lawrence, just a couple of weeks ago at Desert Solstice, ran 100K on the track in 6:07:10. That's sub 6 minute pace for 100K. I mean, I can remember in my youth running a 6-minute mile and what that felt like. And the notion of doing that nonstop for 6 hours is kind of mind boggling. And so, he edged out David Roach, who broke his own course record at Leadville this year. Caleb Olson was 3rd at Western with his Western States time, second fastest time there ever. And Will Murray was 4th with his course record at Javelina. And then Jim Walmsley, who won the World Long Trail Championship, pretty big deal. He was relegated down to 5th place with that. Well, and again, it was impressive. Maybe not quite as impressive as the women this year, but still an impressive depth.
Well, here's what stands out for me: that number 1 performances of the year were all on tracks. I mean, so we kind of, in particular in the United States, we tend to be real trail and mountain oriented. But Megan at 6 Days in France and Charbonnet at Desert Solstice, these obviously aren't trail races, but they yet got voter attention. So that's a good sign that people are being objective of just what stood out.
Yeah, and the beauty of the sort of commonly run distances on the road or on a track is you can actually compare the numbers, right? Because that's sort of the whole point. I mean, at the elite end is they can run a certain time, they know what time they need to run, and when Charlie Lawrence was running the 100K, he missed the world record by like 90 seconds or something, and 90 seconds out of 6 hours was, maybe I shouldn't have stopped to pee that time, It's like not much, right? So, but that's how finely toned these performances are.
Right. Here's a comment I'd like to get your perspective on. So my particular vote, I had both the number 5s here, the number 1, which is to say Katie World Long Trail Championships. I had her performance of the year. I had Jim at the same event, number 1. And maybe I was trying to game it a little bit, because something that's been a common theme here, you brought up a few times, apples to oranges to kumquats.
Yeah.
People don't race against each other. And with the calendar exploding and people, sponsors wanting them to do well, and they have to look good, like Courtney Walker finishing 10th in UTMB, some people have just dropped out because they not finished 10th. So it's sort of this odd way that professionals are approaching it. So for me, John, I went for World Long Trail Championships as being performance of the year, because I think that is a fair test that everyone can gain entry into, rather than entry in lottery or trying to gain an elite entry status.
Yeah, it really is apples and oranges, and I think I kind of, like you, had put a little more value on the Long Trail Championship results, because the fields were so good at both for men and for women at that race. And it was pretty middle of the road race. It was 50 miles long, but pretty technical and a lot of vert, and running the Pyrenees and tough trails. And so it seemed like a fair contest for trail runners of all abilities. Some people prefer the shorter stuff, some people prefer the longer stuff. And it was kind of a, kind of a mama bear trail run, which is ideal. But then, on the women's side, I had Meg Eckert 6-day on top. I just couldn't get that out of my head. That was just mind-boggling to me. And actually, Ann Flowers 50 miles, not, a fast, flat 50 miler. There aren't very many anymore. That was a timing like 40, 50 years ago that people aspired to do. And in the old days of the the thing in Chicago where they ran along the lakefront there, the lakefront 50 was always a big deal, and records.
Yeah. Well, we should note that, if I'm not sure if people want this or not, it's kind of as a plus and minuses to trail mountain ultra running being in the Olympics. Well, it will continue to be a conversation. But if it does go to the Olympics, there's no way it's going to be a 100-mile distance. It's just not a chance.
Yeah, I think they're looking at sort of the 100K-ish distance. The real question to me is what kind of terrain it's on it. Because in Europe, just the nature of the place, the trails are all in the Alps, pretty much. I mean, the Alps run, several hundred miles east and west, from, Austria all the way into France. And that's the big mountain range. And everything else is, sort of urbanized. And so there aren't a lot of trails, just rando trails like you might find in an American, outside of an American town. You go, outside of Denver, there's trails in the foothills that are pretty runnable. And you can go to Southwest Colorado and find trails that are really hard. And in California, the trails are mostly pretty runnable, and and have a lot of rocks and roots, and you get some hills. But and so the races here tend to be more sort of runnable races, and the races in Europe tend to be, more mountainous and more hikey, hike up the hill, run down the hill kind of situations.
Indeed, we talked about Western states, and I'd love to just mountain bike the course. So that's an interesting differentiation point. So your awards you put on, by the way, just to call this out right now. Actually, let me ask you this, John. How much time you put into this? Like you said, the nominations you put together listing everybody's accomplishments is massive. So you must spend 2 weeks doing this?
I spend a little time during the year, every couple, 3 weeks. We're really kind of lucky because both Ultrarunning Magazine and I Run Far have these weekly summaries of what happened last week, and those guys do all the work, right?
I see.
And so Drew Deenan at Ultra Running, you know, and you know, at I Run Far, you know, This Week in Running. So you have
Gotcha.
that work being done for me, and I just kind of steal their stuff, you know, I create a spreadsheet, and so the races that are sort of not just local 50K kind of things, I know I just keep track of the people that win, and then the really big deal races, Western States, I might write down the top 10. Black Canyon might get top
Gotcha.
5 or 6, you know,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Well,
And
in my
then,
opinion, you do a lot of work. Okay.
yeah, I mean, then at the, you know, this time of year or just like November, when most of the big deal races, like after JFK, that's kind of, you know, pretty much the last big deal race of most years. Sometimes there's something after that. And so then I have to kind of grind and go through and look up all the other results from those folks.
Well, thank you for
And
doing it.
that takes some time. But then
Okay.
you talk to the voters, and a lot of voters spend 5 or 10 hours poring over the data, trying to get it right. I remember getting a, a, a ballot back one time, a decade or so ago, from Carl Meltzer as a voter. And um, he was like, his comment was, "Wow, that was harder than any race I ran all year."
This goes. Let's ramp up to the results. We're not going to talk about the age group performance. Go to Ultrarunning Magazine. You can find that. And I should also call out that I am going to do a written summary of all the different runner of the year, which is like 8 of them. I'm going to put that in the uh, Ultra Sign Up newsletter. So look at the Ultra Sign Up newsletter. I'm going to give a summary of the Trail Runner of the Year, FKT of the Year, mile installed, intro points, etc.
Yeah, there are. I should point out, there are, of course, other people doing this, and they do mostly a good job, in my opinion. But this is the granddaddy. This is the one that's been around forever. And if you talk to the elite runners, this is the one that
They want.
this is the one they're focused on.
So a lot of people are not aware that this is the 3rd year, there's been a world ultra runner of the year voting. It's not nearly as extensive that you're going to go top 3 female and male. So why don't you just close it? Who is the number 1? Let's just go number 1 on this one.
All
Ultra
right.
runner of the year.
This is an interesting year. And I just want to comment on the process briefly. We had 28 voters from 18 different countries, mostly race directors, and a few media types. And when we talked about putting this world UROI thing together, one of the big concerns was, oh, the French voters are only going to vote for French runners, and the American voters are only going to vote for American runners. And so we took the trouble of going through the data and synthesizing like how many ultra runners there were in all the major countries. And then we proportioned the voters accordingly. So the biggest participation in the world is France. They actually have more ultra runners than America, even though their population is only about a quarter as big. And so, and America's a close second. Then it's a pretty big drop down to the UK, and so on. So we have done it that way. There were 6 French voters, 5 American voters, a couple of Brits, and then 1 voter from a whole bunch of other countries. And just finding people who followed the world scene closely enough to be able to cast an intelligent ballot wasn't that easy. So, but I think they did a good job as well, and I'm happy with the group now. We've refined it a little bit over the last 3 years. So, for this year, Ruth Croft, who was the UTMB winner, won for the women, and Katie Schide was second, and it was actually pretty close between the two. Ruth got 14 first place votes. Katie got 11. and the rest were scattered around. Meg Eckert was third. So,
Yeah.
and then, we had a variety of runners from other countries, and I didn't count how many countries are represented, but several. And then on the men's side, Jim Walmsley was the winner, and he edged out Tom Evans, who was the UTMB winner this year, with Caleb Olson in third. Um, and Francesco Pupi from Italy was a pretty close fourth, so I'm going to mention him as well. And it was tough because Jim and Tom both had undefeated years, and so now you're really left to just, what do I do with this? And they
Right.
both,
Well, and if you really want to pull it apart, Jim didn't run UTMB because he wanted to run the worlds. So,
right,
for example, the French national team would not allow any of their runners to run the 100-mile distance. They did CCC or OCC, just as Jim did, because
Yeah.
you don't want to do 100 and 2 weeks later.
Yeah, I mean, the timing of it, but it's always going to be a problem because, unless you do it in the Southern Hemisphere, the timing of it is going to be such that it's going to conflict with one thing or another, because you can't race 2 weeks apart and expect to do well. So, and the Worlds this year, for those that aren't familiar, were, I think, 3 weeks after the UTMB weekend. So I mean, running OCC like Jim did, that was fine, probably made sense. It was like sharpening, running, 5 hours, no big deal. But anybody who ran even CCC probably was still feeling that a little bit 3 weeks later. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, good job there. Appreciate you going through the results with us. And again, go to Ultrarunning Magazine or my article that's going to come out in Ultra Sign Up newsletter for the complete summary. So, John, let's shift gears here. What about any controversy? I mean, if you've seen something that just kind of disappointing or something you'd like to call out?
I wouldn't say that we've ever had like major controversy. There's been a couple of years in the dark distant past, and where it felt like, to me, way back when, there was a little bit of controversy. There was a year in that stretch in the 90s and early 2000s that Ann Trayson didn't win, and it was almost like there was voter fatigue, because she'd won a whole bunch of years in a row, and a woman from New York won, and analytically, when I looked at it, I just didn't get it. And that it's kind of funny, because back then the argument was that there was a road bias, because the voters were all old-time East Coast guys, and that's kind of what their background was. And now the argument is just the opposite, that there's a trail bias. And I get the argument. It's, again, you're comparing apples and oranges. I'm kind of thinking that the results this year, somebody could have said, oh, well, Meg Eckert was too low in the top 10, or we didn't give enough appreciation to some other road result. But when the top two performances come out as, one was a track run and one was a 6-day road run, run around in circles, that shows me that while you could argue there's a bias, the data don't necessarily support that.
Gotcha. It's so interesting. Obviously, people can make up their own minds, as you said early on. You sit around and have a beer and kind of argue about this, and it's not shouldn't be intense. It should be sort of fun and generates interest and generates knowledge about the sport. And as you, I think, can summarize, looking at the past 44 years, it's gotten serious. There's a lot of elite runners here. Something we didn't mention about the male Ultrarunners of the Year, a gentleman named Alec Klein. He won outright. He won 13 races, including 5 100s, and is not in the top 10.
Yeah. Well, again, he got a lot of attention because the volume was so impressive. I mean, the guy ran well, like every other week all year, Uh, but again, most of the races he won were not the big deal
Right.
races with a lot of competition, and
Right.
so that probably hurt him a little bit. I mean, he did win Burning River and Mohican, kind of well-known races, but again, those are races without
Well,
serious
he had
depth
a
of
good
field.
time. He
Yeah,
had a great year. He enjoyed himself immensely.
yeah, and
Well,
we've seen that. I mean, I suppose if you just want volume, um, and people were impressed by that. But there was the year that Ed Eddinghausen ran 100-miler every weekend or something. You could have, you could have said that was so impressive. And many years ago, we had to make the point of not allowing FKT data in here because that was kind of its own thing. It was felt and wasn't really head-to-head competition, more like a time trial. Um, but some of the performances were so spectacular that it caught people's attention.
right.
And so people wanted to vote for that, and so we finally, and now we're adding yet another element of confusion to things. So we finally said, okay, those aren't real races, so we're not going to count them. You're
Right.
impressive. And then you picked
Right.
up the ball and started doing an award for that, which was perfect, right? So everybody got their recognition, which is important. It's an important part of this. I mean, I think some of the elite guys and gals now have contract bonuses and stuff if they win or place high in the top 10 or whatever. But mostly it's about recognition.
Mhm.
And so, what I remember years ago, a woman friend of mine got one vote for 10th place from one voter. And she got one vote out of the whole 40 people voting or whatever, and for 10th place. And she said it was the highlight of her running career to get a single vote, and so for people
Well,
in that sort of second and third elite tier that aren't going to win Western States, but are really, really good runners, just getting a mere mention is a big deal.
well, I have not gotten one vote, and I'm
Nor
glad
have
I was
I.
able to take the controversy away by starting FKT of the year. And again, my article in Ultra Senate News will summarize that and all the other different awards in one story. So, John, a few other things. Do voters ever age out so younger ones can come in, or do you just keep the same people?
There's a little bit of turnover every year. Some people just decide to move on. I've done it for a while, and it's a lot of work, and it comes at an awkward time of the year because it's got to be done at year end, and everybody's in holiday mode and dealing with Christmas and family visiting and stuff. So I, lose some of that, and then I kind of try to add 2 or 3 or 4 new people a year as people drop off. So yeah, there's a little bit of turnover, but I would say from one year to the next, it's maybe 10% or something. And
Gotcha.
so a lot of the people have been doing it for a dozen years or something. And
I hope we keep a gender balance and particularly an
yes.
age balance, because obviously, the old
Yeah,
guys
and also
you made, it's
geographic
something
balance, right? We don't want, I mean, I've got a lot of buddies here in Northern California, and I could probably if I bought enough beer, get everybody to just come over and we could all just hash it out. But that's not quite right either, because we don't always appreciate people from outside our region because we don't see them, we don't know them, we don't run against them, and so it's important to have people spread out all over the country.
good. It is. And age and
Yeah,
gender, of
and
course.
age, and again, a lot of them are race directors
Mm.
and race directors of kind of most of the bigger deal races are involved here. And if there's any bias at all, it's that the race directors are often impressed with the person that won their race, And so, if there's a race in the Midwest, the race director there is probably going to be more impressed with the winners than you or I might be.
Okay, well, that's fair
And
enough, as long as they
that's
have
fair enough.
geographic distribution.
Yeah.
John, here's another question, and that comes up for me and probably has for you since you're an excellent data person. Have you ever thought of aggregating the data? So you take these results, you go runner of the decade, runner of the first part of the century. You just take these and lump them together.
We did that for the teens at one point. I think in 2020, because of COVID, nothing was happening, right? And so the magazine was like looking for something to write about. And so we did a look back, but what we did was we just took the results from the previous 10 years voting. And I can't remember exactly how he did it, but you got 10 points if you got a first place vote, and 9 points if you got a second place vote, and added that all up. And so we did have runners of the decade for the 2010s.
Okay, all right. Pardon me, I missed that. I think it'd be interesting because if you got the data, you can kind of work it out.
Yeah, you can do it. I mean, by doing it that way, I mean, you could do a vote again, but we just accumulated the voting totals for 10 years. If memory serves, it was Walmsley and Ellie Greenwood.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. And, and we were talking about the teeth gnashing that goes on trying to be objective. I imagine, is that someone ever invented a data scraper and a formula to just look at the top 250 races and compile the results and come up with some massive algorithm to sort them out?
That might be a good job for AI. Gary Wang used to do a website called Real Endurance, which he's kind of stopped doing, but he did a pretty analytical job of comparing some of the bigger races to each other. And the way he did it was, and I can't remember the exact details, but the same runner running multiple races over like a short time period, like 2 years or something. So they were the same age, roughly same ability, and use that data to say that on average, Vermont was 17% faster than Western State, that kind of thing. And so that was a way to compare sort of times from one event to another. But there's so many other variables, the weather and who shows up and that sort of thing.
To me, you ignore the times. You can just go head to head. It'd just be a head to head.
Well, and that's the beauty and why the voting is always first focused on head to head competition, because it doesn't matter what the weather is, everybody's running on the same day. And so trying to compare a time at Western States when it's 100 degrees versus a time at Western States when it's 80 degrees, that's a pretty big difference. And the times are going to be different, but the head-to-head competition is unfettered by all that. And
it is.
So that's why that's the first focus. But it's only the first focus, not the only focus. So, if somebody runs an absolutely mind-boggling time on a course we're familiar with, but again, that's got to be kind of a big deal race to start with. You run, Dave Roach runs Leadville really fast. Well, that's a big deal because Leadville's been around for a really long time, and a bunch of good runners have run it. Where so anytime you beat a Matt Carpenter record, you get people's attention. But were he to have done that at some new race in South Dakota or something, people wouldn't know. They know David Roach is a terrific runner, but they wouldn't quite know what to make of the time because it's hard to compare it to anything.
Well, John, my last question is, are we going to see you continue to administer? I mean, you're going to keep on going? We're going to be having this conversation again next year?
Well, I think I will, at least, at my advanced age, you don't even buy green bananas. So it's hard to, it's hard to predict for sure, but I enjoy it. I enjoy the process. I find it, I mean, sometimes it's kind of tedious grinding through all the data and stuff, but it also keeps me abreast of what's going on, sort of by osmosis, all that data passes in front of your eyes, and some of it might stick in your brain. And I enjoy working with the voters, a lot of whom are friends of mine, and I think the result comes out really good. And so I like what's been done, and I'm happy to continue doing it, at least for a while.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for doing what you do, John. I very much appreciate it. And I think everyone else does as well. I mean, 44 years, like you said, like we said here, this is the OG trail runner of the year award. People value it highly, and it has this credibility that's going to continue into the future.
And that's important. I think that it's credible is the number one thing.
Thanks so much, John.
Appreciate it, Buzz. Great talking to you.
Thank you for joining me. I feel like I'm with all my friends. This is Buzz Burrell, and I'll be back 2 weeks from today, delivering more thoughts you've probably never heard before. This podcast is a production of Ultra Sign Up and releases every other Tuesday, alternating with The Trailhead with Zoe Rome and Brendan Leonard. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe and click that button that says 5 stars, because that helps other people.